Now let us take a new piece of poem, Television, composed by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is one of the most prolific modern writers in English and is well known as a children's author. The poem Television is a famous poem of Dahl that advises and inspires to read books instead of watching the television. This is one of the most relevant poems of our times. The poem takes a comic look at a serious problem among young children today. It warns us about the dangers of watching television excessively. TB robs our mind of the power of imagination and creativity. This is very important. Now let us go into the text of the poem. The first stanza of the poem goes on like this. The most important thing we have learned as far as children are concerned is never, never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. For the sake of convenience, students, I have written the poetic device in front of the line so that you could understand what it is about. Now, first of all, let us understand what is a poetic device. It is an ornamental language in order to decorate the sentence structure to create more emphasis. Now, here, never, never is repetition, which is also called epizeuxis. Dahl advises from his experience that people should never ever allow their children to go near the television set. It is even better not to install the idiotic thing called television. But why is a television an idiotic thing according to the poet? Throughout the entire poem, Dahl attempts to answer it. In almost every house we have been, we have watched them gaping at the screen. Gaping means open-mouthed. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Under bracket, last week in someone's place we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. Again, we find out a new literary device here, and which connects loll and slop, and thereafter and which connects slop and lounge is a repetition of conjunction. Check out here, which is an example of a literary device called Polysyndeton, which is a repetition of conjunction. Now here, the poet shares his experience here. In almost every house he has visited, he has watched children gaping at the screen. They were staring with their eyes wide open and with absolute concentration of mind. For sitting a long time before the television set, they become tired. Sometimes they sit or lie in a lazy and casual manner and get sloppy. All these are not Dahl's imagination. He indeed saw a dozen's eyeball, half a children sitting on the floor watching at the television. A dozen eyeballs on the floor again is an example of hyperbole, right, which is an exaggeration. They sit and stare and stare and sit. Check out the line if you remember what I said in the previous stanza. And is a conjunction here and is connecting this sentence, which is again an example of Polysyndeton. Until they are hypnotized by it, until they are absolutely drunk with all that shocking, ghastly junk. Here we find out that the children are before a television set. They sit and stare and stare and sit for long hours. They don't seem to be moving from there, as they probably forget everything around them in the real world. Rather, the one they watch on the television becomes real for the time being. They are almost hypnotized by this idiotic box. Actually, here, idiotic box again is an example of transferred epithet, because this is not the television which is idiot, it is making the children idiotic. So, the feelings of television getting transferred on to the children. These TV shows kill their valuable time and make them lazy with no room for their physical play. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. Here we find out that there is a literary device called Sibilance, which is a repetition of S sounds. Wash the dishes in the sink. I will mark it out for your convenience. Here it is. S sound repetition, example of Sibilance, right? Okay. Now the poet now says that he knows that the television keeps the naughty children calm. When they are in front of a TV set, they no more do mischievous things like climbing out the windowsill, fighting, kicking and punching. They let the mother free to cook the lunch. But that can't be an excuse to let them sit before a TV. Because the poet thinks that the idiotic thing does more harm than good. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? Tot means small child. It rots the sense in the head. It kills the imagination dead. Now, why does the poet uses the capital fonts here? Actually, it is to give emphasis in the poem. The poet speaker now asks the parents whether they ever spent a moment to think exactly what harm this television does to their loving child. He himself answers it in a brilliant way. What does he answer? Watching the television regularly damages the sense in the head. Children are drawn away from their reality, the real world around him. He just believes what he watches without considering the context. His own environment hardly matches with the ones he sees on the screen, but still he thinks all that are real and applicable to him. It also kills the power of imagination in the mind. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind. Dahl continues to argue on how television affects a child's mind. Children watch different shows on different channels. Sometimes they are contradictory ideas, sometimes it does not match with reality, and they are surprised. Thus, these things clog and clutter up the mind, mess up the organized ideas and thoughts. Moreover, the child forgets to think on his own. His entire mind is full of the images he has on the TV. So how would he get the time and scope to think over other things? He can no longer understand a fantasy, a fairyland. So the poet feels that due to the imposed limitation on thoughts, the children can no longer understand a fantasy or a fairy tale. They cannot discriminate or extend their imaginative power to that level. They are now used to see an image of the likely real world, a virtual reality. His brain becomes as soft as cheese. Again, here we find out a very important literary device, which is simile. Now, what is simile? Simile is a literary device in which a comparison is done between two objects. So, the brain of the child is being compared as soft as cheese. So, the comparison has been done and the poetic device is simile. His powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. Dahl now opines that by watching television, the brain becomes soft like cheese. Children now believe everything they watch or hear on TV. They cannot find their own logic to analyze and interpret a thing. The power of thinking, the thought process freezes and gets rusty. They cannot think on their own. All they do is watching and believing what others say on TV. All right, you will cry. All right, you will say, but if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. Now the poet says that he knows what the readers, or especially the parents, would ask him. The question is, how parents shall entertain their affectionate children if they take the TV set away from them? The poet has the answer in the following lines. We will answer this by asking you, what use the darling ones to do? How use they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Don't you know? The poet answers the above question only by throwing a question. What people used to do keep themselves entertained when a television was not invented. TV set is a dreaded device, a monster too. He wants people remind what they used to do in the absence of such a device. We will say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They had read and read and read and read and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott! Gadzooks! One half their lives was reading books. The poet reminds us that children in earlier times used to read a lot of books. Surprisingly, people then spent half of their lifetime by reading books. Great Scott! Gadzooks! Is an expression of surprise or amazement of the poet. Here it shows that how the poet gets annoyed and shows his element of surprise to the readers. The nursery shelves held books galore. Galore means plenty or many. Books cluttered up the nursery floor, and in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. In those earlier days, the nursery shelves were full of books. In nursery schools, books remained scattered on the floor, cluttered up everywhere. Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragon, gypsies, queens and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores where smugglers rowed with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good. What can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. There are many things to be discussed in this stanza. First of all, Penelope. Penelope is a girl's name. She was a mythical character who was eaten up by the cannibals, people who eat human flesh. In the above line, the poet is adding an extra information. That's why it is given in brackets. The line before this says that cannibals were crouching around the pot. Therefore, when the pot is smelled from afar, it smells good. Here the poet talks about the popular books of adventures that children used to read in his times. In those days, boys and girls read fantastic stories of dragons, gypsies, queens, whales, treasure islands, smugglers, pirates, ships, elephants, cannibals, and so on. Again, we find a literary device here, which is called alliteration. What is alliteration? Alliteration is a repetition of consonantal sounds. What is the consonantal sound in this line? Per in pirates, per in purple, and per in pants. So this is the repetition of consonantal sounds. The younger ones had Beatrix Potter with Mr. Todd, the dirty rotter, and Squirrel, Nutkin, Pigling, Bland, and Mrs. Tiggy, Winkle, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost his rump, and Mr. Toad, and bless my soul, there's Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole. Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. The young children used to read stories written by Helen Beatrix Potter. She was an author of children books featuring animals with colorful illustrations. Dahl here pays a tribute to the children author for her fantastic stories on animals. He also mentions some of the stories like how the camel got his hump, and some characters like Mr. Toad, Mr. Mole, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. From this story, this shows the poet's love for those books and how he enjoyed them in his childhood days. Moving on. So please, oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Roald Dahl, the poet, now requests the parents for their own good to throw away their television set and install a bookshelf in its place. Then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams and yells, the bites and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks. After installing the bookshelf in a place of TV set, the parents will face some dirty looks, screams, yells, bites and kicks from the children. They may even hit them with sticks, but the poet insists on filling that shelf with lots of books on various topics, ignoring all those screams and sticks and such like that. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they will now begin to feel the need of having something to read. Dahl here assures us that after a week or two, these children would find nothing to do without a TV set, and they will finally feel the need to read books. They will come closer to books on their own. And once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They will grow so keen. They will wonder what they had ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. Repulsive means disgusting, hateful. And once they start reading, the only way is ahead of them. They will find it interesting to read more and more books. They will find it, the imagination and thoughts, the knowledge and wisdom, the satisfaction of mind and heart. At one stage, they will grow so keen on reading books that they will wonder what they had found in that silly machine called television. They will find the television screen disgusting and unclean, and they will discover the real joy of reading books. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did. Here, you represents parents, as the poet represents the parents or the readers. And finally, each and every kid will love the parents for giving them the opportunity to find real joy in reading books. Even when they would grow up, they would thank their parents for taking that television set away and installing the bookshelf there. The poet advocates for reading and only reading. Books are the only things that can deliver real wisdom. There are some poetic devices to be observed. Simile, his brain becomes as soft as cheese. I have discussed it in the text. It is for your observation. Metaphor, until they are absolutely drunk. Here, children's mind filled with images and stories of a virtual world are compared to a drunk man's imaginary world in an apt metaphor here. Consonants and alliteration, this we have discussed earlier. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, like in the sentence, and in its place you can install. What is the repetition? I in, I in its, and I in install. This is repetition. Sibilance is a kind of consonants where S sound is repeated. So, and sailing ships and elephants. S in sailing, S in ships. And wash the dishes in the sink. S in wash, S in dishes, S in sink. This is the example of sibilance. This we have discussed. Never, never, never is repetition, called epizeuxis. Polysyndeton we have discussed, repetition of conjunctions. Enjambment is incomplete sentences. We will find out all over the poem. The first sentence ends at the sixth line, making the previous line incomplete. Enjambment. You can go through this. Synecdoche again is referring to a part by the whole or whole by a part. So, when a dozen eyeballs on the floor is also an example of hyperbole, it also refers to a part of their body. Allusion, however, is the covert in reference to another work of literature. So, in the poem, when you find out the television, when the poet make a reference of Penelope, Squirrel, Pigling, Mrs. Tiggy, Winkle, without openly acknowledging them, he makes a reference in his poem about them. This is called allusion. Anaphora, hyperbole. Now let us go to the question and answers. What is the most important thing the poet has learned regarding that children should read and the parents should never allow their children near the television set? Why has the poet experienced that almost every house he has been? What has? That children loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. The poet has used two words to indicate children's addiction: hypnotized and drunk. Why does the parents let their children watch TV? Because they can do their work easily. What damage do the television do to the children according to the poet? It rots their sense and kills their imagination. What is the poet's advice regarding the TV set? Throw away and install a nice bookshelf. What will be the initial reaction of the children if parents throw the TV set away? They will scream, give dirty looks, yells, bites and kicks, or hit their parents with sticks. Why would be their final reaction about the books? They will have the wisdom and knowledge and more joy than what television offered. Thank you very much.